I think that a lot of men are struggling with having a purpose within culture and society. I think we've moved into this interesting place where culture, society, people at large are kind of saying like, men aren't really needed. You're not really needed. You're not really wanted in these spaces. You should just sit down. You should just stop talking. And so a lot of men are checking out, and the data is showing that, right? There's 7 million men of working age in America that are eligible to work and not working. 7 million men between the ages of 25 and 55 that aren't working. That's a monstrous population. Less young men are dating than ever before between 18 and 29. So you have a population of, I think it's 32% of men between 18 and 39 aren't in relationship and
are not pursuing
a relationship.
It's interesting.
In that same age range, you've got, I think it's 37 or 42% of those men haven't been sexually active in a year or more.
Which would not be I guess the ones who are having a lot on.
They're having a lot.
They're crushing it.
And so I think for a lot of guys, they're like, and then you have college rates, which I think is the last piece that I'll put in, which by 2030, the data is showing that for every one man that graduates college, 2 women will graduate. Now, that's the inverse of what it was in the 1960s and 70s, where we passed Title IX in America so that we could actually encourage more women to get into the university institutions, get a college education, go into the workforce, sports, et cetera. And so now we've gotten to this place where it's like, I think it's 43% of college graduates are going to be men. So a lot of these guys, I mean, if you just look at everything I just said, less men going to college, less men dating, less men engaging in sexual activity, right? Like being romantic, going on dates, that kind of stuff. More men engaging in porn. There's more men statistically living at home. Right now in America, there are more men living at home with their parents between 18 and 29 than there are men living with a partner. Right.
Damn.
So you have more men living at home, not working, not dating, not going to college. It's like that for me is problematic. And I think what's challenging is we can sit there and say, well, that's a result of men. But I think we need to look at the social conversation that's happening about men in general and the purpose and the function that men are being told. Because I think, I believe, having worked with men for a decade, is like, we all desire a purpose. Men desire a function.
Meaning
within,
it really matters.
Yeah, meaning.
Meaning really, and we're meaning-making machines. And what concerns me about all of those statistics is the epidemic of loneliness and isolation, and that what ultimately that leads to, which is it leads to violence, it leads to self-harm, it leads to suicide, it leads to abuse, disassociation, trauma, all of it, right? And that's my biggest concern. And when that starts to happen in society with a large group of people, which is essentially 49-50% of the world's population, we're in trouble as a collective. Like we can't isolate and segregate ourselves in that way and say, oh, well, that's a man's problem, so let the men deal with it. I don't think it works that way.
Well,
we're too interconnected.
Right. And I think added on to this whole conversation about the statistics about the impact that's obviously occurring on men is the conversation about men is like masculinity is toxic. James Cameron, you and I talked about how he was like, testosterone's a toxic hormone. We need to get rid.
Is he fucking serious?
That's what he said. He said it's a toxic. And then, actually, I got one thing in there.
Yeah.
The American Psychology Association in 2019 or 2020 published guidelines. American Psychology Association published guidelines for therapists and psychologists to work with men. And in it, they state, and this is verbatim, it's verbatim in there, that traditional masculinity is harmful. Verbatim. And so,
just get up, break something, come back.
Let me show my masculinity.
So on one hand, I think when I hear this, it's like, why don't more men go to therapy? It's like, well, it's like.
How do you even define traditional masculinity is toxic? I understand that.
What expression of what traditional masculinity is?
Right.
So it's subcultural. It's every group of people has their own definition, if you like, or expression of what traditional means to them. That's such a bullshit conversation, and that's coming from a credible institution
that also
carries
removed
weight.
The bereavement clause for depression from the DSM. They also said that face masks don't affect child development, and then removed everything on their the American Pediatric Association, I believe, removed all the data on their website that showed how important facial attunement was for development, just to support their state. I could go on about systems and just how, you know, obviously all that stuff can be useful. Let me add that qualifier. But like, I look at this conversation and I think of like all the stats you guys are dropping. And I can't help but be sad for men who are we're not generally equipped to then confront everything you're saying on our own and make our way through the world to resolve or heal. This, you know, you're taught your whole life generally to not be emotional, because if you're emotional, you're abandoning masculinity. So your status within a masculine group will be rejected if you're emotional. And then you enter relationship, and I think regardless of whether you're in a relationship with a man or a woman, but especially if you're in a relationship with a woman, the woman's like, I need your emotionality. And you're like, yeah, but if I give you that, I lose. And then you look at Brene Brown's research showing that when a man is emotional or cries in front of a woman feels like she can't trust him.
Yeah, unsafe. She didn't feel, she didn't feel supported.
Like, how does a man even move? Because I think that's the opposite response of all this conversation that's happening in media is men then become boundaryless. They become, I don't know if the right term is feminized, maybe, but maybe that term in general then evokes like, well, what's wrong with feminism?
Nothing.
Nothing. But it's like, what's wrong with boundaries?